Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00. Today I'm going to address a portion of the art style debate and give reasons as to why it is somewhat justified when you look at the lore. So today we're looking at the aesthetic differences between Forerunner architectures. Before we really get into it, we're going to bear in mind that although there are significant differences from the original trilogy and the more recent games, by definition all designs we see should be considered as canon, as they do appear in the games after all. I think the biggest failing in the execution of the art style differences was not giving logical reasoning behind the changes, which have at least a passing anchor in the lore. I strongly believe had more effort been put into explaining why things changed using Halo's own lore to guide the decision-making process, much more of the community would have happily accepted the art style changes overall. But again, I'm just focusing on one particular aspect of it here today. So with that in mind, allow me to fill in some of the information void and finally give a reasonable answer as to why there are so many differences. In Halo CE, we are introduced to Halo for the first time. It was mysterious and enigmatic, majestic and ancient, yet super advanced and sophisticated. The first images we saw of the Halo were large rolling hills, huge cliffs and beautiful waterfalls. The upward slope of the ring above us demonstrating this world was unlike any other we had a frame of reference for. And over some of the furthest rises we could see large blue beams of energy near silently rocketing into the sky, suggesting to us that there was more to explore. And with a small walk up the rolling hills we come across the first architectural example of the creators of the ring. Large, geometric and monolithic, made of a dulled geometric metal that looked oddly new and old at the same time. The location and purpose of this first building gave no hints to its function or purpose, a trend which continues through practically every single Forerunner environment we encounter for the entirety of the rest of the game. In Halo 2 we come across another Halo. This one is very similar but also has some notable differences. On this one we come across what could be considered as stone ruins, a similar architectural design to the more metallic structures we have seen on both Installation 04 and 05, but made of a completely different material. But after a short journey we soon come across the atypical Forerunner architecture we are accustomed to. In Halo 3 we are introduced to the Ark, and although everything about this place is massive, it still abides by the Forerunner aesthetic. There are massive monolithic towers and buildings that seemingly defy gravity, and others still which quite honestly appear to defy the laws of physics altogether. They are ancient, enigmatic, geometric, and a complete mystery as to the function and purpose. I don't know about you guys, but I found myself often just walking around the various Forerunner environments and just looking at things, trying to figure out what they did, why they were there, why the Forerunners would have made it that way, and what the various glyphs, symbols and Forerunner text means. Then we get to Halo 4, and we're introduced to Requiem. Here things are different. The architecture is more complex, made of large extrusions, anti-gravity floating sections with underlying circuitry looking lighting. The material is much brighter and cleaner, no grime, no accumulation of dust and dirt and tarnish which we were so accustomed to, and makes logical sense after nearly 100,000 years of standing empty and abandoned. The intrinsic geometric patterns have disappeared and have been replaced with prominent seams between apparently separate but integrated sections. Halo 5, and even on a different planet, we see that same aesthetic as Requiem has continued over to Genesis. Although it should be noted, when we ultimately return to a Halo in Halo Infinite, it would appear the older art style aesthetic has returned. So what's the reasoning behind it? Well, the answer stems from two parameters of consideration. One, the cultural specifics of the Forerunners as a species, and two, the passage of time. The Forerunner society was divided into a number of different classes known as rates, each rate specialising in a particular field of work. The builders, who designed most of Forerunner technology, from ships and weapons to their various megastructures, were the highest rate and wielded the most political power. The second rate were the miners, who obtained construction materials for the builders' projects, and were responsible for planetary and stellar engineering. Below the miners were the life workers, who were responsible for medicine and biological research. The juridicals were a rate whose duties encompassed legal matters within the ecumene. The warrior servants served as the primary fighting force of the ecumene, while the engineers maintained technology and machinery. It's important to remember that the Halos are one of the most prominent places we have directly experienced in the Halo universe, and the Halos were designed and built by the builder rate of the Forerunner ecumene, and in particular, the master builder himself, Faber of Will and Might. And since the Halos are a builder construct, so too is the Ark. From this we realise that practically every single place that we visited that was of Forerunner origin in the original trilogy were of the builder design and construction. The Halos were designed as weapons of mass destruction that could wipe the galaxy clean of all sentient life, thereby starving the Flood to death. It was the sword that the Forerunner ecumene decided was the only logical solution to the Flood threat. But it wasn't the only idea to save life from the Flood. The Promethean warrior servant, the Didact, had addressed the Forerunner ecumene with his own idea, the Shield Worlds. These Dyson spheres, and in some cases micro-Dyson spheres, contained within slipspace fields, would have an insurmountable amount of inner surface area, able to provide safe haven to literally trillions of individuals and millions of species. And he planned to build many of them. The ecumene, however, decided that the Halos were a more likely strategic option, coupled with the Librarian's reseeding protocol allowing life to return to the galaxy after the Halos were fired. Although the Didact hadn't the support of the ecumene, he continued to build the Shield Worlds nonetheless, and as such had the design aesthetic more akin to the warrior servants. This is perhaps why there was such a significant design change between the original trilogy and the newer games. The Forerunner constructs were simply created by different rates. From this it can be reasoned that the warrior servant aesthetic and architectural design includes large extrusions, floating sections and backlit by circuitry, and a bright and highly polished finish and extensive use of hard light, while the builder aesthetic was more geometric, enigmatic and somewhat aged in appearance, as it valued the use of actual physical raw materials, refined into building materials that will inevitably wear with time and weathering. The differences are similar to the difference you may get with Earth's Western civilizations as opposed to Earth's Eastern civilizations. Although we are of the same species, the differences reflect the values of the particular culture who created it. Oh, and remember those ancient ruin-type constructs we've seen? Well, the builders believed that their ancient ancestors had technology and knowledge far in advance of what they had in the modern era, and spent immense time looking at, studying and preserving any ancient Forerunner constructs they'd find. So they'd actually remove them from their original location and place them on the Halo Rings or the Ark or other significant places so that their studying could continue and so that they could control the environmental factors which may lead to further degradation of the more ancient building materials and their hidden properties. This extends further than just the architecture. The Sentinels described at Onyx, a shield world, had a central eye and were surrounded by 3 floating boom arms, demonstrating that the floating design didn't come out of nowhere, but actually existed in the lore at the time Bungie ran the show. The Promethean Knights have floating joints and limbs and are also a warrior servant platform, as are the soldier armigers, who also have floating sections. Mantle's Approach, the Didact ship, has floating sections in the same design aesthetic as Requiem, also a shield world, and also of warrior servant design. Even the weapons, which would have been wielded almost exclusively by the Forerunner warrior servants, were also designed with floating sections and internal design aesthetics. In the same breath, the Halo Sentinels are more solid and geometric in design, lacking floating sections, and appear to be made of similar materials to the other builder constructs. The Halo itself is a builder construct, as are the Retriever Sentinels, Monitors, Constructors, the Ark, the Keyship, and the Ark Portal. So it cannot be said that the floating design never existed in Halo lore before, and that it doesn't fit in with the lore because it was in existence in 2006 when the Ghost of Onyx was released, meaning it was around only 5 years after Halo first graced our lives and thus didn't appear out of nowhere 7 years later in 2012 when Halo 4 was released. The passage of time also gives a slight but meaningful bearing on how Forerunner architectural design was influenced. The Shield Worlds and many other Forerunner constructs were created when the Forerunners were either unaware of the Flood, or were only just discovering them. There were in fact two separate classes of halos created. The Senescent Array, which was an original array of 12 halos designed and built as the Flood retreated from the galaxy as a strategic feign, were a much larger array measuring 30,000 kilometers in diameter. The smaller Neoteric Array, measuring only 10,000 kilometers in diameter, and the array we are familiar with, began construction as the Flood returned to the galaxy. As the Forerunner Flood War progressed, and the Forerunners lost system after system, colony after colony, and eventually lost the greater arc and all but one of the Senescent Array, it is likely that resources became harder to come across, and likely more emphasis was placed on simply getting the arrays operational for the automated terraforming and species cataloguing systems to take place thereafter. This time constraint and pressure from an ever-advancing foe likely had some influence on the architecture, making what would normally be a builder construct designed to be ostentatious and clearly a representation of the builder's immense knowledge and strength more modest and simple in its design, opting for the time a simplified design would buy the Forerunners during this desperate time. Admittedly, there are several differences between the styles of Forerunner constructs from Halo 1, 2 and 3 to now, but once you take into consideration what I've outlined here, it actually starts to make a lot of sense. But nonetheless, I'd love to hear your takes on what works and what doesn't work for the art style. The apparent art style change we've witnessed in Forerunner architecture is as a consequence to the order in which we have been exposed to their constructs. The entirety of our known experiences with the Forerunners up to Halo 4 was only the constructs made by the builder rate, even though evidence of warrior servant style already existed way back then, and the only aesthetic we have seen since Halo 4 has been of the warrior servant design. It is entirely possible, as we discover more about the Forerunners and find more of their constructs, that we come across other, different design aesthetics from the other rates that still possess the impossible scale and mystery of the other structures, but exhibit different designs altogether due to the cultural differences between the rates of the Forerunners, which have obviously outwardly been made more pronounced by the Forerunners' artificial means of mutation to become more suited and fitted to their roles in society. This ultimately would only accentuate the great differences between the rates, which we then inevitably see in the only things left behind after their sacrifice. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below, I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons: Satenshi the Silent Cartographer, Brian, Sebastian, Holden, Defiant Alpha 117 and Nathan, the Holders of the Mantle, Justin, Darian, Ty, Black Biscuit, J Rabbit, Austin, Cameruptus and Brent, my Reclaimers, Zach, Deep Cover, Verbal Statue, Spesigo, Spartan A498, Guppy, Josh and Evan, my Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome, and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed at insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all social media channels, including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time to put into this content and other Halo related goodness. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.